The first sin. It lingers over Dark Souls 2 constantly. A seemingly innocuous phrase that was so important that it shows up almost nowhere in the game itself, save for a secret final boss and the namesake of the game's re-release complete edition. In fact, sin itself is a weirdly focal but heavily obscured theme that underpins Dark Souls 2. Outside of the aforementioned Aldia, the Lost Sinner, and a hidden mechanic related to the amount of players you've invaded and NPCs you've killed, I'm sorry, Targray. Your armor shouldn't have been so damn cool. Sin really only shows up in veiled references and within item descriptions as either overt or subtle allusions to sins of the seven deadly variety. Like many narrative elements that either got lost in translation, lost in Dark Souls 2's known development hell, or maybe a bit of both, this first sin lands in a spot of being both deeply thematically intertwined, yet seemingly vague and distantly related to the entire game as a whole. But what is it? What is the first sin? With layers upon layers of both linguistic, mythological, and literary translation to sift through, this seems to be a tough one to answer for the Souls community that I personally haven't seen anyone name outright. VatiVidya, of course, when there's Souls lore, there's Vati, had a video that poked at it a bit over a decade ago, but it mainly seemed to reach many conclusions that didn't actually name the first sin. Still, a good video though. I believe that within my exploration of mythos and themes within games, I have an answer to this decade-old mystery that didn't seem fully solved. Because the first sin is something we've all heard before, that is remarkably simple, yet incredibly pervasive, connecting with every in-game example of evil, failure, or loss, as well as many real-world understandings of sin. So sit back, grab a snack, and join me as we dig in again to Dark Souls 2 and try to discern what is truly the first sin that Aldia was getting so scholarly about. To start, the wording of first sin is vague. First sin is like, who's the first Pokemon? Bulbasaur because of Dex entry 001, Rhydon because it was the first ever designed, or Arceus because all of the Pokemon world proceeds from him. Like everything FromSoftware, this is veiled in layers of interpretation, but there's a few clues. Aldia, of course, having this be his moniker, is probably the best place to start. Just before his boss fight, he comments on previous monarchs.
Many monarchs have come and gone. One drowned in poison, another succumbed to flame. Still another slumbers in the realm of ice.
Tempting as it may be to read into the symbolism of each element that they were consumed by, the more important piece to this discussion is the idea of being consumed by something. While I allude to this to a degree in my prior video about the consumption of kings, the real connective thread is the fact that all of them were devoured metaphorically and quite literally ended up buried beneath something within their own kingdom. Earlier than all this, if we look all the way back to Dark Souls 1, there were another two kingdoms afflicted by this same sin, Lordran and Ulasil. Lordran itself isn't buried yet, but Gwyn sure is, buried within a mountain of ash, confined and powerless within the kiln of the first flame, and, of course, Ulasil. While we don't see its ruler, we do see Manus, who we know was once mortal. Interesting. Gwyn, a god, and Manus, an ex-mortal, suffering the same fate, buried and lost somewhere long forgotten. Seeing that this sin has been happening since ye olden days of Gwyn and even earlier with Manus, what does that actually tell us about the first sin? Well, a few things, actually. Gwyn's linking of the first flame in itself is not the first sin. Also, we can more safely assume that the first of the first sin is not the first time in history that anyone did something naughty, but rather see it as more of an Arceus situation in that Pokemon allegory. the sin from which all other acts of evil and misdeeds are born from. So, what is this big bad boogeyman of a sin? This sin so heinous, so diabolical, that it ruins people, kingdoms, and entire worlds, both in FromSoftware games as well as in our reality? Well, it's actually something I've talked about before, in my overlong video essay about some themes explored by Dark Souls 2. While I had certainly clocked it for its rich, rounded, voluptuous thematic presence in the game there, I hadn't realized just how profound and pertinent it was to Dark Souls 2 until I heard another word to describe it, ironically, from my local church service. The first sin is desire. But not just desire. Hamad, in Hebrew, is a word implying an intensity to a desire that, under the wrong circumstances, can be catastrophic to both the individual and the entire world. Hooray! It's time to talk about my favorite subject, want, and all of its lewd and lascivious literary cousins. Desire, lust, allure, love, passion, covet, all under one umbrella of this Hebrew word, hamad. Not just a term, but an idea that crops up everywhere in ancient myth, modern fiction, and religious understanding. Show of hands, regardless of faith background, who knows the 10 Commandments? In the Bible, Exodus 20, God prescribes 10 laws to the Israelite people after years of slavery in Egypt, presumably expecting those years of slavery to have wizened them up a bit to what causes problems, both interpersonally and societally. The first 5 commandments are, as understood, vertical laws, prescribing the people's relationship with God. But the second half are horizontal laws, prescribing how the people ought to live in relation with one another. Don't be icing fools, don't bang your homie's girl, don't be stealing, don't go around spreading cap, and don't want stuff? The last commandment always seemed strange to end on. Thou shalt not covet. Followed by a few examples of what covetous behavior looks like, but after that list, don't murder, don't cheat, don't steal. It's just weird. But with a deeper reading and a linguistic understanding, the final commandment actually makes perfect sense for identifying the real ingredient that cooks up a nice big batch of sin. It's desire, as understood through Hamad. But even then, desire itself isn't bad. I said as much in my last video, identifying this large, curvaceous theme of desire that simmers under the surface of everything in Dark Souls 2. Desire is a deeply natural and deeply human state of being, which also is what makes it so much more deeply corruptible. Desire is a natural response to any duality or discrepancy. Things can and always will seek to resolve. Music, colors, states of being, romantasy book protagonists and edgy boys, light and dark, chaos and order. I suppose if you want to get really technical, take the theory of gravity and apply it to everything. While obviously the smart people involved in the theory of gravity are talking about physical, tangible, and observable objects, we also have plenty of non-scientific anecdotal evidence that proves to an extent that, yes, all things with disparities will seek some form of resolution. Yeah, you should write that one down. Concupiscence is integral to the fundamental structures of reality. Anyways, it's clear that the issue is not just desire on its own. It's as natural as water extinguishing fire, or eating when you're hungry, or realizing just what an absolute baddie the Emerald Herald is. The issue lies in that far more descriptive word, hamad. Like many words that are old and describe things key to human experience, it has many definitions. To desire, to delight in, to find pleasing, to love. But yet, the word still carries that implication here of an extreme or intensity to that desire. A desire that will see someone go to any length to fulfill, regardless of what is reduced to ash in their wake. And with that lens, we can view this again in the context of Dark Souls and the first sin. The first sin isn't the linking of the fire, or the fall of Ulasil, or even the follies of the countless kingdoms to rise and fall in this universe. The first sin is unchecked, uncontrolled desire that manifests into any action that violates the laws of nature or the life and agency of others. To pursue, seek, and reach insatiably for anything without regard or respect to nature and its order. To frame and understand this through the lens of Shinto, the dominant belief of Japan, where FromSoftware develops these games from, this is kegare, corruption, pollution, anything that disrupts the va of nature. To ignore and overstep bounds, to take action in a manner that shatters natural harmony. Desire is natural, and that desire should be oriented in a way that preserves va, while any violation of that harmony has to be cleansed or purified. And, of course, the word sin, as Dark Souls 2 specifically refers to it by, even in Japanese, is most associated with Christian and Jewish religious tradition. Sin is, according to St. Augustine of Hippo, I kid you not, that's what he's known as, it's a disordered desire or love. When our human desire is corrupted or distorted in such a way that violates the order of nature or laws of moral conduct, and we then take that distortion and act upon it or build other beliefs around it, we sin. And thematically, this tracks all the way through Drangleic and its four lords, the Lost Sinner, the Rotten, the Old Iron King, and the Duke's Dear Freyja. Even smaller bosses leading up to them like Covetous Demon, Mythos, or Najka have souls or items that hint at this perversion of love and desire that corrupts them into monsters. To the idea of good things that are deeply corruptible, I believe it's why fire is so thematically entwined with everything in FromSoftware. Kilns and Crucibles, Ages of Fire and First Flames. Fire is one of the ultimate disparities in human history. It gives light, warmth, helps us build just about everything, and is effectively one of our biggest natural advantages as a species, that limited ability to shape and control flame. But just as fire creates, it is just as ruthlessly destructive, burning things to the ground, taking lives, destroying all the progress people have made in a fraction of the time it took to build. Linguistically, fire has many Japanese kanji for it, as well as many kanji that it overlaps with. Some of the more notable expressions I saw that it overlapped with: jonetsu and shinen, desire, ardor, fervor, excitement. All words relating back not just to desire, but to that extreme of it. The immolation spell, despite its status as absolute cheeks for usability in-game, is again a narrative and thematic goldmine. If someone is truly desirous of something, perhaps being set on fire is not so bad. Across every Souls game, and especially relevant to Dark Souls 2, it's the pursuit of a disordered desire that, instead of creating growth, progress, or creation as desire should, it horseshoes right back around to becoming another form of stagnation and resistance to change. Interestingly, immortality of some form or the attempt to make something last forever almost always ends up as a conceptual or literal aim for both beings in this game and most human mythology with warped or misaligned desire. Marika, Nishandra, Gwyn, Anakin Skywalker, Arthas Menethil, Sir Mordred, Gilgamesh, Adam and Eve, Satan. I want this, I want that, I want more. And to some degree, it also seems to be where that distinction between golems and living beings of Dark Souls 2 seem to reside. The ones that are acting on their desires with restraint and control versus the ones who become bound to and enslaved by that desire. The first sin is hamad, and is when someone lets their desire become disordered with the harmony of reality. Shinto understands it as kegare in disharmony. Abrahamic faith understands it as sin misaligned with the will of God's moral authority. Both arrive at a similar conclusion to what happens when our desire is not tempered. People, especially those with power, reach into the fire, let the torch burn too long, try to keep doing every trick they can think of to keep holding on to the flame instead of accepting that all flames die out and they needed to appreciate that flame while it lasted instead of taking increasingly horrific measures to try and prevent it from fading. Maybe, to an extent, we could understand this hamad desire as both the first sin and the first sin. It is the one that has led every kingdom to ruin, and the one that precedes the tangible action of a sin. When your heart fixates on something and wants it more than it wants to maintain balance, more than it wants to preserve harmony, and more than it wants to be content with reality. In Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. One last interesting thing to point out is how, across all of FromSoftware's mythos, kegare, or sin, committed by a being almost always is represented or ends up as some form of containment and consumption by their desire. Aldia as a burning tree, Vendrick as a hollow, entombed husk, Nishandra bound to relentlessly pursue you to the throne of want, Gwyn forced to stay in the kiln with his flame, tending to it and guarding it, Manus trapped beneath his own darkness, all the DLC kings trapped under the element of their kingdom's darkness, the lords of Dark Souls 3 perpetually waiting for the world to end in their own dark corners of the land, Marika removing the rune of death and becoming trapped, petrified even, by the Elden ring she desperately tried to shape to her will, regardless of what it ended up doing to the lands between. So, what can be done about the first sin? Both in these games and in life, desire is not bad or evil. It's good, natural, and a part of what causes anything to happen at all. Desire is why disparity is so central to the theme of Souls games, and reality if you think about it. Because without meaningful disparity, there's no reason for action. The answer to the first sin, hamad, is simple. Contentment and acceptance of limits, of boundaries, of uncomfortable truth, of when what you want or think you want is disordered and detached from what is true and fulfilling, from what has to happen, from when things must come to an end. It really does seem like every video comes back to this, but finding meaning in what is, shedding desires that are their own perpetual loop of unfulfillment and wanting more, and embracing a relentless authenticity both in yourself and in others. This isn't to say the world should never be changed, because there are still real problems that persist in it today. But to fix anything, you have to be able to accept what is first. And when it is time for change, we have to be capable of detaching from how we want things, and instead believe and strive for a world of desires ordered the way things ought to be. Hello everyone, and welcome to the end of the video. I want to ask, what do you think was the first sin? Does this desire hamad reading make sense to you, or do you think there's more to it? I'm eager to discuss this with everyone in the comments. Of course, a channel update that I'd be remiss to mention, 1,000 subscribers. What a milestone. I'm truly so humbled, honored, and proud that with the help and encouragement of everyone who's watched, commented, and of course subscribed, we went from goodbye to full steam ahead in 2 months. Also, I apologize for the switch from what I had alluded to initially having planned as the topic for this video, but after a few days of writing, rewriting, and a whole lot of research, I decided on this because I'll be out of town in the next couple weeks and I wanted to have something uploaded before the end of the month, and let's just say that video's beginning to look more and more like was Dark Souls 2 a dream in scope with each passing moment that I research. So expect it to be a bit longer before my next upload. Anyways, thank you all again for watching. You all rock, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.